Hello and good afternoon. My name is István Lengyel. I am the Chief Operating Officer at Kilgrave Translation Technologies, and today I'm very proud to present you QTerm, our web-based terminology management application. During this webinar, I'm going to show you a couple of slides, explain what QTerm is, how it relates to MemoQ, and then also give you a hands-on demo to the tool. When we create, why did we create QTerm? Well, MemoQ has had an integrated term-based engine from the very beginning. The first engine in MemoQ was a very simple one, which could only handle up to 15,000 entries. Then we created the second engine, which works very well with 500,000 to a million entries. It's very fast, but there is a drawback to this, and that is that it has a set structure. You cannot customize the structure. There are several advantages to this. One of them is to be able to add terms very quickly, and this is the reason why translators working in MemoQ are making good use of the terminology component in the tool. But nowadays, MemoQ is a very popular tool among enterprises, among institutions as well, and terminologists there have criticized MemoQ for the lack of flexibility when it comes to term-based management. MemoQ has a very good terminology tool for translation. It is mostly enough for translators and also translation managers. But when companies want to extend terminology management beyond translation, they face hurdles. QTerm is meant to overcome these hurdles. QTerm is a browser-based terminology management system that connects directly to a MemoQ server. So this way, companies can allow everybody in the organization to access term bases through popular web browsers such as Internet Explorer, Firefox, or Safari. The terms in a QTerm term base can have a customizable entry structure. You can store information specific to your organization. This is very important for concept-based term bases where you want to tailor the terminology entry to your organization. But at the same time, translators still have full access through MemoQ projects. So QTerm is one of those very few terminology management systems that integrate very closely with the translation management system. What is needed to run the tool? Well, I explained already that QTerm is an extension to the MemoQ server. In reality, it uses the terminology engine built into MemoQ, but it exposes functionality that is not available through the MemoQ interface. Therefore, technically speaking, you need a MemoQ server installation. Given that you need a MemoQ server installation, you need a Windows-based operating system, which can be Windows XP or better. And as QTerm is a web-based application, you need the Internet Information Services of Microsoft installed, and you also need the .NET Framework 3.1 Service Pack 1 to install QTerm. So basically, you need a computer with MemoQ installed, and you need a browser-based system, so you need IIS to install a browser-based system, and the .NET Framework. QTerm does not require you to install and license any external database application. It works with the terminology engine built into the MemoQ server, so therefore you don't have extra costs on top of the Windows licensing costs and the QTerm licensing costs. Actually, the web server can even be on a different server than the MemoQ server. So, who did we address with QTerm? Well, I'm sorry to say in the first place that QTerm is not a tool for freelancers in the first place. It is a tool that addresses the needs of language service providers and enterprises. How can a language service provider benefit from using QTerm? Well, first of all, you can differentiate yourself by providing managed terminology services to your customers. Research shows that companies that differentiate themselves through technology grow faster than other companies. Therefore, if you're looking for growth, you can provide additional services either free of charge or for a fee to your customers, and this may include managed terminology. This way your customers can access your term bases that you build together with your translators and terminologists through a web-based interface. They can also comment on the individual terms. They can edit the terms. So if there is something that they don't like, they can act. This way you can open up your system towards your customers. You can also allow expert reviewers and customer reviewers to contribute to the terminology without having to install MemoQ. Very often you get a text which requires, for example, a review from an expert biologist, and there are not so many biologists who are ready to do a translation review. And sometimes you just cannot get these people to install a translation tool. If you are offering QTerm, you don't have to ask them to install a translation tool. They can simply log in to the website and contribute there to the terminology. The other target group for QTerm is enterprises and institutions. If you use QTerm, it can be a single point of access to any terminology that you create and maintain in the organization. It also allows your translators to access your QTerm resources directly. So this way, everybody can contribute easily, but at the same time, your translators are going to have the same degree of support from the term bases as they have in MemoQ. And that goes very far, because in MemoQ, the terminology can also be used for quality assurance purposes. It is even used to improve the quality of alignment. It's also used for fragment assembly. So you can also use forbidden terms. And these services that MemoQ provides are still there, even if you use QTerm. So what is the licensing and upgrade path like? QTerm can either be licensed individually or it can be licensed as an add-in to the MemoQ server. If you license QTerm individually, you still need to install a MemoQ server, technically, but that is part of the license fee, and that is a restricted version. If you buy it as an add-in to the MemoQ server, then it starts communicating with your MemoQ server, and you can appoint certain term bases to become QTerm term bases rather than MemoQ term bases on the server. The standard installation includes support for 30 concurrent users. As for the upgrade and maintenance path, QTerm's path is identical to that of MemoQ. QTerm is fully integrated with the MemoQ translation environment. Translators are getting matches from the tool automatically. They can also suggest new terms. And what's also very important is that setting up a QTerm term base in a project is very easy. It's not at all more difficult than setting up MemoQ term base in a project. This is something that we have seen with some of the competition, that they had major difficulties getting translators use a complex term base rather than a very simple one, because they needed to install extra tools, they needed to configure the access to the term bases, and so on and so forth. And sometimes they just gave up during this process and started translating without terminology. But if you do your translation without the support of terminology, you easily lose consistency, brand awareness can be damaged, and this is something that through the integration with MemoQ, QTerm can avoid. Also with QTerm, you have access to moderated term bases, which means that terminologists can come in and review the terms before they get final. How is data migration happening? So if you decide to go ahead with QTerm, then it can convert MemoQ term bases into QTerm term bases, as I'm going to show you that. Kilgrey also offers data migration services, which are part of the license fee. QTerm has support for exporting to the TBX standard format, and the TBX import is currently in progress. So far we have a couple of customers for QTerm, and we managed to migrate all the term bases so far without any loss of data. And in order to do that, I'm going to jump in, fire up MemoQ, import a term base into MemoQ, and show you how this conversion works. So bear with me for a second, please. I'm going to start MemoQ. Here you are. And I'm going to import a term base into a local copy. Then I'm going to share this on the server. And once it is shared, I can migrate it into a remote term base. Given that I wanted to use a relatively larger term base, this will take a little time. So let me show you how I do that in MemoQ. You probably are aware of this already. So first of all, I'm going to Resource Console. This is where I can manage all my resources, and I set up a new term base, let's say on my computer for the first time, QTerm webinar demo. I can put in some metadata if I want. The client is QTerm users, and I can check some languages. I'm going to check Czech and English and French. And I click OK now. So what I can do here is that I can import some of the documentation here into a MemoQ term base. This is what I'm going to do. First of all, I need to select the encoding. This is correct now. There will be alternatives which are split by commas. And as you can see, the rest is going to go all right. There are also there are also German terms in the term base. So right now I have enabled MemoQ to expand the range of languages in the term base, and it's now importing into this local term base. Once I'm done, I'm going to check this server here. So this is what also hosts our QTerm installation, and I'm going to share this on the server. As you can see, all the importing and sharing happens in the background. So what I'm going to do is that I share QTerm webinar demo on this server, and I go back to the slide deck. So this is how data migration happens. And probably you're asking whether QTerm is a byproduct of MemoQ, or does it have a bright future? Well, it definitely has. We decided to release a first early version of QTerm, but we already have a lot of plans to improve it considerably in the near future. It's already a very competitive tool. Basically, the reason why we have marketed QTerm is that we have seen competition from some other tools, but we have a lot of ideas that we have not seen in other tools, especially in the realm of collaboration. We believe that very soon, within a year, QTerm will be a cutting-edge tool. There are already a number of companies deploying QTerm, and as you can see, some of them are pretty big names. ILF from Austria, the Deutsche Post DHL from Germany, Consys from Azerbaijan. They are the first translation company to adopt QTerm. Thank you for that. And Arvato Medienfabrik, which is a Bertelsmann company in Germany, is also starting to use QTerm. So right now, it is time for a live demonstration of the tool. And let's see what has happened in the meantime. It appears that the resource is still uploading. My server connection to this server, which is actually a server on a DSL connection in our office, is not very quick. So please bear with us until it is uploaded. But in the meantime, I can log in to the QTerm interface. As I mentioned, the interface works with most of the popular browsers. We haven't tested it with Chrome yet, but I'm sure that it will work with that as well. So I first log in, and I'm going to log in as an administrator user. And when I click sign in, MemoQ authenticates me, QTerm authenticates me, and it takes me to the main screen of QTerm, where I can search for certain terms, where I can manage my term bases, list just for certain languages. You can see that if I list only for Italian, for example, then the number of term bases here is going to go down. On this page, I can also create brand new term bases. I can set the permissions, who has access to certain term bases, who does not have access, what sort of access they have. You can also set these permissions in MemoQ. I can export, I can clone term bases, or I can just simply go into a term base and edit either the definition or the complete properties. By properties, you can see that meta information is here, you can see the languages here, and you can add or remove languages at any point if you edit the properties, and you can also see the term-based definition here on all levels, and whether it's a read-only term-based or not. Let's check if this is done. So far the import appears to be done. So let's look into the QTerm webinar demo. As you can see, in MemoQ, so far it still appears as a remote resource. And I'm going to go into the Convert tab. This is where I can convert this database into a QTerm database. Here you go. And now it's not available for conversion anymore. But on the other hand, it's available here. You can see the languages, and if you select it, you can actually browse the term base very easily. I selected that I would like to see all the English terms here, and as you can see, you can go through the terms which are listed in an alphabetical order. But if I want to see all the German translations for these terms, I just select those, and you can see, for example, how you say acacia honey in German. That's Akazienhonig. You can edit the terms, delete the terms straight from here. As you can see, you can add synonyms here if you like, or you can also change the grammatical structure of this term. On the other hand, you can edit directly the entire entry and add whatever you want, whether a term is forbidden, who has created it, and so on and so forth. And you can also have a pretty print display of this. So if you move from this expression to another expression, you can see that all in a nicely formatted manner. Okay, now let's have a look at how you can convert and change the definition of the term base. Because probably those of you who are interested in QTerm will want to change the definition of the term base. We'll want to use custom fields as well. So I select the term base and I click Edit Definition, and you can see that in QTerm every term has 3 fields. So the term structure has 3 levels. It has the entry level, which relates to the concept itself. It has a language level, which relates to a language, and it has a term level, which relates to an expression. So what can I set up? Well, as you can see, MemoQ has a number of built-in fields that are already taken over by QTerm, given that I imported it through MemoQ. If you want, you can hide this. They are automatically filled out very often, but you can also change the values. So if you hide this, then only a number of fields remain. So first I'm going to remove the node from here. It doesn't matter. But on the other hand, I would be interested in what institutions use a certain term. Let's say I'm going to add institution, the name of the institution that uses this term, and I can select any of these field types. So as you can imagine, you can have text fields. This is free text. You can have a number here. You can have true, false, a Boolean value. You can have a date. You can upload any sort of media. It can be a graphical image, it can be a video, it can be a sound file, you name it. And you can also use pick lists. A single pick list is a pick list in which you list a number of values and you may choose only one. A multiple pick list is a list in which you have a number of values and you can choose as many as you want. In this case, I'm going to create a multiple pick list here. And the values here are going to be, let's say, EC for European Commission, EP for European Parliament, Court of Auditors, Committee of Regions, and so on and so forth. And you can define whether something is required or not. So first of all, QTerm is indicating that I should use semicolons as the separator. Now I can make the required field, and the default value is going to be EC for the European Commission. And I'm adding this new field. Now on the term level, so you can see that there are a number of predefined fields here, but you can remove them if you want. On the term level, on the other hand, I'm very interested in an approval stage. The status of the expression, and an approval stage is a single pick list. So it can be draft, it can be reviewed, and it can be approved, for example. And this is again a required field, and here I can only choose a single value. So while here with the multiple pick list I could choose all four, here I have to choose one out of the four. So let's click Add Now, and let's save my changes. Now QTerm is changing the entry structure for every term in this term-based QTerm webinar demo. What you can see, of course, is that QTerm works with a number of term bases. There is no limitation on this number. And you can have a custom entry structure for each and every term base. So now, if I look into this term base again, I can see, let's say, the spin chiller chilling process. And here, for this process, I can add the institution. Let's say it's also used by the European Parliament. It's as simple as this. I can see the individual terms for Czech, for English, and so on and so forth. And there is also an approval stage. Let's say I can say that in German, this spin chiller Kühlung is already reviewed, and I can apply the changes. And once the changes are applied, I can go back to the spin chiller chilling process again, and I can have a look at the pretty print layout, which is also showing me the approval stage, which is also showing me the institutions, and so on and so forth. Of course, you can also filter terms for different words, and you can select other languages as well, and you can edit the individual entries, terms, specifically. So here I have English, and let's say I can add French here, and I can edit these expressions. I can add a new term, synonyms, I can remove certain terms, or I can just go back and return to the entry. This is just the normal way of managing terminology. And now, in this webinar, what I would like to show you is how you use terminology from QTerm in MemoQ. Because that is clear that if somebody enters, let's say honey here, you can select what term basis you want to search for this, and you can search anywhere in the term. Of course, this can take a while. You can see that these expressions appear in the different term bases, and you can just search for all the honeys here. You can have a look at how chunk honey is called, let's say, in French. So in the pretty print, you can see this. So let's now have a look at the integration with MemoQ. In order to do that, I'm going to create an English to German term base. And I'm going to use this document, which is a very simple Word document that I just made up, to show you the matches coming from the term base. As you can see, Word doesn't, yeah, it's in English language. So let me close the resource console, and just like I work in a normal offline project, I create a brand new project. Obviously, you can also include your QTerm term bases in online projects that are set up for the translators. So QTerm webinar demonstration. This is going to be English into German, and then on the first page of the new MemoQ project wizard, I set up the name, and on the second page I can take the translation document and I can import it into the tool. This is what happens now. The document is imported, and I'm going to click Finish right now because I need to register a remote resource. So I click Finish. MemoQ opens the project home for me, and under project home I can navigate to term bases, and as you can see, I see all the term bases coming from both QTerm and just the MemoQ server residing on the KillRayDoesn'tExist.com server. So I'm going to select this, and MemoQ prompts me for the default filter. Filtering is also an integral part of QTerm. You can use, let's say, just a single big term base in the entire organization, but in certain translation projects, you can restrict the translators from, or other colleagues as well, from looking at the entire database. Rather, you can filter them for, let's say, just the newer terms, or just the old terms, or you can filter for just expressions that are specific to the European Parliament, so that they don't see all the terms coming from the European Commission terminology, and so on and so forth. Or you can also say that you wouldn't like to see those terms that contain the word honey. It's a filter that you can set up, and for the different types of data content, you can set up different filtering rules. In this webinar, I'm not going to go into that, but if you are interested in having a trial of QTerm, just let us know and we will be able to go into that and see it. As you can see now, It's part of the project, so I can simply start translating. And it's as simple as that. I just open the document for translation, and MemoQ starts fetching the QTerm terminology from the term base directly. As you can see, I'm getting the terminology hits. Number 1 is a terminology hit. European Monetary Agreement is Europäisches Währungsabkommen in German. And I am not only getting the terminology, I'm also getting the fragment assembly match, just like I get that from a normal MemoQ term base. And of course, if I don't get it right, so if I, let's say, make a mistake here, and I want to add that or confirm this segment, I'm also getting the issue from the quality assurance control, so that I have to fix it, and if I do fix it, the issue is gone. So in MemoQ directly, you have full control over terminology, and what's more, you can trigger editing the entry straight from here. This is how the integration happens, and as you could see, adding a QTerm database into a MemoQ project is not at all more complicated than adding a simple MemoQ term base here. This is really the power of integration with MemoQ. This is all that I wanted to show in this first webinar. As you could see, QTerm integrates very closely with MemoQ on the one hand, but on the other hand, it also allows your co-workers to have access to your terminology through a web browser. It allows collaborative editing, and it allows the customization of the terminology structure. It is a technology that is based on .NET, and it requires the installation of IIS, but can be accessed from any of the popular web browsers. So this is it for today. I would like to thank you very much for your attention, and I would like to open the floor for questions. Thank you.